if for some reason you are clicking a video by me that's discussing KIZUMONOGATARI and you're not familiar with this franchise, then thank you very much for having that much faith in me. But I guess I should describe the plot. So, guy meets girl, they talk a bit, guy then meets another girl who's a vampire, she's dying, he decides to offer his own blood to her to be nice, because he's such a nice guy deep down. And she then says, hey, now I sucked your blood, you're now my thrall, you gotta go get back the body parts some vampires stole from me. He then manages to beat all of those vampire hunters and get the body parts back. Then, when they're happy, he gets to know her a bit better and they're having a good time. And then he remembers, oh wait, it's a fucking vampire, it eats people, maybe this was a bad idea. And so he decides to try and fight her, and in the process of doing so comes to a conclusion where he reduces her down, he sucks her blood, while she sucks some of his, and the end result is that they both become... Then he drinks her down, so they're both basically a 10th vampire, and everyone is extremely unhappy with this turn of events. At long last, we've conquered the attack of the sporting events interfering with my schedule, and we are back here to do something far better than watching sport, isn't that right, Matt?
Fuck you.
That's what I was after. Apologized beforehand, but I will apologize again on the air. Sorry for putting you through this. Sorry for putting you through my favorite film of 2017. It is time to talk about KIZUMONOGATARI. I need to tell you the story of two different creative groups. There is a Japanese novelist by the name of Nishio Isin. He writes teen and young adult fiction, often published month by month in magazines, a format known as light novels in Japan. He's a very vocal proponent of the power of popular culture, and he's very strong in his texts on having really, really dense references to pop culture. His argument is basically that if pop culture is the thing that people most frequently consume, it's going to be the most reflective and the most useful venue in which to discuss modern life. So there's very strong, heavy references throughout his material. It also leads to the tone that he writes things in, since characters are dropping references, the narration is using references to describe things. Everyone's talking about junk, they're talking about disposable, trashy media, which leads to this resting irony in everything that he writes, which often leads to his characters having these very detached, apathetic tones in the way that they speak. This guy's written a big bunch of books, but perhaps one of his most successful is a story called Bakemonogatari, which translates quite conveniently into English as Mon's Story. You get a nice little portmanteau in both languages there. This book was about a guy called Koyomi Araragi, who wanders around, meets a bunch of girls, helps them with their ghost problems. The book did quite well. In fact, so well that he then wrote some extra chapters, which then got retroactively added into later reprints of the book. He then wrote a prequel called KIZUMONOGATARI, then wrote several more books continuing the story. Those books do some interesting character development, and take the characters in some interesting directions. And so, inevitably, since people were liking these books and they were making money, it was time to do an animated adaptation. So, the people behind the animated adaptations of this work is a studio called Shaft. Now, this studio started in about 1975. It kind of just fell into the mix of being another animation studio through the 80s and 90s. And as the 90s came to an end, there was a bit of a crisis of identity for a lot of Japanese animation, in much the same way that at the start of the 90s there was a bit of one for the film industry, where, say, Toho as a film studio was perplexed at what they could do. They thought that their next Godzilla film was going to kick Jurassic Park's ass, and then they went there and their minds were blown by how good that film looks. Similarly, at the end of the 90s, there was a bit of an identity crisis going on because computers were coming in, there were new ways of making things, films like Toy Story were coming out, there's new ways to do animation, there's new ways to do it cheaper, there's new ways to do good-looking animation, and holy shit, Tarzan just came out, and this film called Treasure Planet is on the way, and we just saw the trailers, and there is no way that anyone in our country, except for maybe Studio Ghibli, can possibly compete with this quality and this high of a standard. If you watch things like, say, the Excel Saga show from 1999, there's an episode that's basically about this identity crisis in Japanese animation. And Studio Shaft was certainly one of these, which is wondering, what do we do if we cannot possibly hope to compete with the peaks of animation? So in about 2002, the head of Studio Shaft came up with an idea. And it took a couple of years to begin to formulate and implement it. But the idea was he got an animator, a very, very talented animator called Akiyuki Shinbo. And he grabbed this guy, and he said, "Hey, Shinbo-san, you've done animation work, you've done storyboarding, you've done planning, you've done basically all levels of animation production. So here's what I'm gonna do. Studio Shaft, we're not even gonna try to be like some big fancy animation studio. We are going to be the auteur studio. You are going to be Studio Shaft. You just choose whatever things that you think will be fun to do. Whatever projects you want to do, that's what we're going to do. However you want to work on that project, you go ahead. If you need to direct this one, you direct. If you just want to draw things for it and assign other people, that's fine. Make stuff for us. Studio Shaft is whatever you shape it to be." And so he goes on, and he starts training up people to be as artistically enthused as he is. The first few things that happen, perhaps of note, is there was a popular action comic at the time called Negima. It had a fairly mediocre first season produced by JC Staff. It was around that time that the comic was really starting to get really nutty as far as just being this balls-to-the-wall action series. And then Studio Shaft purchases the rights to adapt it, and they turn it into an absurdist comedy for 2 seasons. Because Shinbo thought that would be funny. That's the sort of thing they start doing. And they start crafting this bizarre, unique style. All these weird visual hooks he starts throwing in for the fun of it. If you've ever seen in, say, something like Madoka Magica, characters frequently talk either with the camera at a Dutch angle or with them tilting their neck in order to simulate a Dutch angle. He starts putting in weird little visual motifs like this, while also training up people to try and bring out the best in artists. The end result of this is that in 2009, it's time to adapt Bakemonogatari. And so they do. And he's training up all these new disciples to be insane auteurs like he's becoming. And in particular, a guy called Tatsuya Oishi gets the reins for Bakemonogatari. And so he takes what is this really obnoxious light novel, where everyone's got this detached, ironic tone, and he edits the show as quickly as he can, really rapid cuts, so all the dialogue has this real fast, punchy tempo to it. He does some really weird artistic decisions. The backgrounds are supposed to be just a conventional Japanese town, but the depiction is as bizarre and abstract as you can make a town possibly look. Characters start having basically screen bumps, where the screen will just flash a color, which is indicating that a particular person is the central focus of that scene. This also simulates where the paragraph breaks and the text occur. He starts experimenting with typesetting as being more important than motion in scenes. And because the studio has become so pretentious and so focused on doing whatever weird, crazy ideas they come up with first, they start having production headaches. Because producing anime is always to a very short schedule, and any time that you have any sort of complication, it can throw the thing completely out of whack. Normally this leads to things like, a recent example would be the 4th season of Full Metal Panic. That fell behind by about a month in production, and so it looks awful for the most part. Just, they don't have time to draw all the scenes. This starts to happen in Studio Shaft shows, and by Bakemonogatari, it almost becomes a desired endpoint for the teams. Because the less time they have to achieve their vision, their attitude is, well, if we have something that's interesting, people will buy the Blu-rays, and we'll touch things up there. But in the meantime, we've got no time, so let's explore minimalism, and how little motion and how little visuals can you have, and still technically call something a cartoon. It's around episode 9, I think, of the broadcast version of Bakemono, which really hits this peak where there's no time to draw anything, so it's just a copy of the script being shot in weird ways, with the font colors and the font choices used for the text in their reprint somehow conveying a lot of the character's personality. Kinda hard to get a hold of these days because the Blu-ray has the actual animation now. So in the wake of doing this, the decision is made, okay, we're gonna do the stuff which follows on from this book, and the team which made this first season is going to do a movie based on the prequel, KIZUMONOGATARI. So the plan will be that 2010, there will be the next season called Nisemonogatari, and then in 2011, the Kizumono movies will come out, and then we can do the stuff which follows on from there, since the prequel gives some contextualization for how people were behaving early on. But since the studio has developed this culture of pursue the art above all else, this leads to a bit of creative anxiety and imposter syndrome. And so a film which begins production in 2010, first of all, it balloons into a it balloons into a trilogy. How did I forget that word? And from becoming a trilogy, it then further balloons into a case of, no matter what the people working on each cut of the film are doing, they don't think it's good enough. And so they keep throwing them in the bin and starting again from scratch. So they spend a couple of years in this ludicrous development hell of going, what are we doing, oh god, how do we adapt this in the way that we really want to? And so 7 years later, in 2017, the films finally come out. Upon their release, the director, Tatsuya Oishi, made a bunch of tweets joking about how at long last it is 2011. And so we get to KIZUMONOGATARI, the complete movies. A trilogy of films which should not exist. Bakemono is a very difficult thing to recommend at the best of times, and KIZUMONOGATARI, when viewed without any of that context, is a pretty hard watch even with the context. It's mean, it's nasty, it's creepy. It's got some fascinating examples of how that you adapt a text to film, and that is why I subjected you to it. Anything you'd like to say now?
I guess I should probably start off by just saying that I'm not the best person to talk to anime with. I've literally liked one anime in my entire life, and there's
1.5, I think.
Okay, sure, but I don't like to remember that. Well, maybe we'll talk about that some other time. I'm not a fan of anime. I've even ones that probably would be considered good or more critically popular. I've not really enjoyed that much, and
well, the thing is, as far as the classics of critical reception, you've only really seen Bebop and Eva, because most of the critical reception tends to be directed at certain iconic films, which I'm hoping to get to at some point.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I guess what I'm just trying to say is I know that just something I probably should just say is like out from the outset from talking about this film, and also that I think a good example of just not being that into anime is that as much as it seems so obvious now, I actually didn't clock the fact that that auteur pretentious kind of feel at the start of for this movie. And like you guys were talking about that all throughout the film, like how pretentious it was and like highfalutin, all those words, auteur. I didn't actually clock it until you guys started talking about it, because the idea that anyone could consider this art never once crossed my mind. Like within the first 10-15 minutes, it was like, okay, this is trash. So I just assumed the people who made it knew it was trash, and they had that kind of attitude, that kind of like bro or dude kind of like the people who made heavy metal. I thought it was those kind of people, but I completely got that wrong. So I'll say that immediately.
Alright, so I think a good way to try and really grasp this is, let's talk about the first 7 minutes, because it was around the 8-minute mark is where you died, and I knew you were going to die there. So let's talk about those first 7 minutes. Can you just paint the picture of what was happening there? What sort of things were going on, the visuals and stuff?
Okay, we started with the camera very close, I'm pretty sure, on a single person. He is alone in a building. He is clearly, I think he's in an elevator, I believe, at the start, yep. And he's wandering around an empty building, which is going to become a very common thing in the film, a lot of empty area. But
he's quite panicked or perturbed.
Yes. I think one of the main thing I noticed about that opening sequence, like in my mind anyway, was just how close the camera was on him and how erratic the movements were. Which initially I was like, wow, this is actually kind of interesting. One of the problems I've often had with anime is, maybe this will come off as dumb, depending on other people's experiences of it, but I've always felt like sometimes they feel very flat. It's like there's only one real camera angle. And this it sounds crazy now, but I was actually kind of excited for the film in those first few minutes because I was like, well, this actually looks kind of interesting. There's some, I'm not sure if you'd call it camera work because obviously there's no camera, but...
Well, I mean, you might remember, I think it was staging is the term used in the Guide to Animation when we talked about Snow White. But yeah, cinematography.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree too. Like, for that first, like, little bit, I was like, oh, maybe this is... I don't know why. I mean, we know what you like and and what this podcast has been like, but I was, like, yeah, a bit optimistic.
Yeah. Like, he walks out of the building, he's like, very, as Louis said, he's very perturbed, very scared. And then he walks out and he sees, like, a bunch of crows, ravens or crows, some kind of blackbird.
Corvid of some kind.
Yes. Oh, good word. I love that word. And eventually the sun comes up outside. There's still no one around. Then there's apparently a helicopter. Apparently, that is not the case eventually, but I assumed it was. We're talking about my experience. I was like, oh, I thought there was a helicopter watching him. That was what I understood. I thought, oh, they're watching either to save him or to observe. I was like, oh, there's a helicopter watching him. And then he catches on fire. And when the sun comes out, and he eventually falls off the building, and it turns a little bit into comedy at that point because he starts bouncing around. When he hits the floor, he starts to bounce.
He's incredibly bouncy.
Yeah, that's when I started to lose it a little bit. And that's basically the start of the movie, right?
Yeah, that's right. It starts in medias res. In particular, you might remember when I talked about eyes being the window to the soul. And it was to build up to this. One of the things that is tremendous throughout the whole text is the way that it uses eyes to try and convey things. So I think it is time that I reach into this bag here and I pull out the source text. Here we have a copy of Wound Tale KIZUMONOGATARI by Nisio Isin.
The Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon.
Well, I mean, look here, there's a picture of Kissshot and the skeleton. That's cool. So I will get to chapter 1. So that is how the film begins. Like, there's this tension, this fear, this confusion. Something's unknown, and it's only as you see the camera zoom in on Koyomi's teeth, you see, there's something vampire-related, in conjunction with all these ravens lurking around, and then finally catches on fire and the sun comes out, and you're it's a vampire story. This is going somewhere. It's a story about someone reconciling vampirism.
I also, because of the fact that I thought there was a helicopter, I initially assumed the story was going like, oh no, the public is going to find out about vampires, and that's where I thought the story was going to go.
So, I shall now read to you. Chapter 001. Here is how...
Or prologue.
Here is how the text begins. I suppose I need to get around to talking about Kissshot S. Rolia Orion Hard Under Blade. I probably have a duty to do so. During the spring break between my school's second and third years as a high school student, I met her. It was a shocking meeting, and it was a catastrophic one. In any case, I must have had terrible luck. Of course, in the same way that I was unable to avoid that bad luck, even if I somehow had, I doubt someone else would have met that fate. It actually seemed extremely irresponsible to talk about my bad luck here. Maybe I should just be upfront and say that it was my fault. In the end, I think it was a chain of events only made possible because I was me. A chain of events. That is the first paragraph of the source text. And I think through hearing that you can now understand the dilemma and the conflict here, where here is an incredibly talented creative team that really understands the language of film, and this is the voice that they have to convey.
I mean, it doesn't sound like... what's the main character's name?
Araragi.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like Araragi. Like, that sounds more like a British, like what you imagine like a well-spoken British person to sound like.
Yeah, there was a real, it reads like a YA fiction novel. Essentially is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Probably because it is one. Yes. And it's so interesting because the TV show maintains this voice and quite frequently uses this narration. In fact, The first season opens each episode with excerpts of the novel appearing on screen in rapid succession. But the film really wants to try and find a way to elevate this material into conveying something more about adolescence and the confused mindset that someone might have, and they're trying to make sense of themselves and how they relate to others. And it's still got to convey this, though. So, it's hard. I guess we haven't done any adaptations before, have we? No, I don't think so. So, what is the key difference between the written word and film?
Space, time to set things up. Perspective as well.
Yeah, I think perspective is the key one. Space and time are good ones because a book is asynchronous time. You can pick up and drop it off at any point, whereas a film is intended to be viewed in a single viewing in sequence. The other thing is... Well, one of the other things is budget. It costs the same to write a space opera in book form as it does to write two people sitting in a room talking to each other. Whereas with film, the costs and logistics are ludicrously different. This is, I think, one of the neat things about animation when it comes to adapting literature, is that you're applying lines to a blank canvas in much the same way that you're applying ink to a page. Means that there's a similarity, in particular like comics, I think. Comics and literature and animation are all interesting media to interact with each other. And yeah, as Louis was mentioning there, perspective is the other one. Books are internalized. Film is externalized. With words, you're able to convey ideas and get in people's heads, whereas with film, no matter what you're doing, the camera is looking at something. And so trying to get what's inside people's heads out onto the camera is often really hard. And this is where film movements like Expressionism were so important for exploring how you don't necessarily need a photorealistic depiction on there. There are ways that you can try and externalize the thoughts by playing around with things like scenery and what people are seeing. There's numerous moments in the editing of Kizumono where it tries to achieve that by having the prediction that someone's making play out, then cutting back to where they were before that moment, and then you go, I
didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of times where things like that happen. But of course, it's then, how do you get, this resting... You can already tell, the resting irony. How did I describe before? The detached irony that runs through Nisio Isin's writing. And how, a lot of the time, the film is trying to really get at the emotive core that's hiding behind this level of detachment, is what it wants to convey. But that any time people have to actually start talking to each other, it then has that level of attachment, but visuals that don't match what's happening there. So, can you detail, say, any of the scenes where people are talking? I mean, they're all the same scene.
Well, there was just a real, they talk to each other in a very expository, matter-of-fact kind of style, in just a manner of which it just wasn't very human-like at all. They talk to each other like machines. I
could not defeat him when I was before, but now I could defeat him now, but I couldn't defeat the other one now because he is more powerful.
Yeah. I wanted to do this, but because of X, Y, Z reasons, I could not do this. But now, because of X, Y, Z, I can now do it. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's the sort of functional yet ultimately banal dialogue, which is where a narrator really comes in handy. So here's an example. One of their conversations. The conversations are interesting as well because there's a lot of fat in the book which isn't covered in this one, which was done in the TV show, because it's trying to be a more visual work, which ultimately helps to make them so much more boring to listen to as well. So, let's see, where am I here? I'm home! The man waved casually, a Boston bag in his hand. Could Kissshot's right leg be inside? This is after the fight with Dramaturgy, by the way, which was the first vampire fight. Good job, Araragi. I didn't really do that much. What are you talking about? You put in some hard work. I know, I was watching you from the shadows. You were? This is all fairly similar to the film's dialogue here. Yep, Oshino said, nodding. So guess what? I also know that you made a girl pull up her own skirt. That's me vocalizing to ellipses, by the way. Also expressing my feelings about that scene in question. I recalled feeling a bit happy when I'd mistaken Hanakawa hiding in the shadows of the school for Oshino, but now I only felt embarrassed. But he really was watching, huh? Still, why say that in front of Kiss Shot? Look, she's tilting her head disapprovingly. Oshino? No need to worry. I was watching you from the front, so I couldn't see that girl's panties from my angle. That's not what I was worried about. You got a good friend. Is she your classmate? We're in different classes, but yeah, she's a friend. Her name is Tsubasa Hanakawa. She's a class president among class presidents. I said, though it was embarrassing in its own way. See, at least we're getting some degree of his own comments and thoughts on the matter. Huh, Oshino mumbled noncommittally. In any case, you should probably explain the situation to any witness, especially her, since she seemed like a smart one. That was my plan, okay, yada yada, there's all the important dialogue stuff. I don't think it matters if I'm dealing with a boy or a girl in this situation. What's this now? Is that really your level of awareness? Unlike girls, boys don't come up with creative dance routines, do they? Man, you say that like girls have more originality, but it's just that they only have a creative dance component in PE. What a way to judge me and my originality. But Araragi, you're the one who will be fretting because you can't dance when the story of our everyday lives gets turned into an anime. But why would our everyday lives get turned into an anime? Because a drama CD can't convey the wonderful face you make when you act the straight man. Our everyday lives were a drama CD? It'll be fun though, it'll be like the ending of Demon Lord Hero Legend Wataru. I don't think I was even born when that was on the air. You say that, but I see your Kyocera phone. The prospect is so on your mind. What sort of roundabout appeal am I making? The faces you two are making. This fucking guy.
Quick question, was that you just skipping to the dialogue? Or were you just reading the page?
That was me reading the page.
Jesus Christ. I'm obviously not a professional writer, but I've written some stories, and one of the things I'm always really worried about is too much dialogue compared to everything else, and now I feel much better about myself because that is insane. That is that is just writing, that's just dialogue, that's it. You can't do that. You have to add little things like what are they doing during, what are their actions during the scene, what is their facial expressions, how are they saying it, what are the character's thoughts as it happens, or some brief asides. There's a way of breaking up dialogue there that is just not me. I know that's not really maybe the point of what we're trying to get at here, but it is what I picked up from. I picked up it's a horribly written book. Is what I'm.
It's also it's a difficulty because this is a first-person narrative, right?
Yes.
I think that's just a general difficulty with writing a first-person narrative. Just from third person, it's very natural to describe the things that are going on to the people over there, like you're seeing them. So I don't want to make too many excuses for the guy writing this, but I do think it's definitely something that's difficult to weave in.
Yeah. And so if we again think about the films that we just watched, and think about how much body language it's trying to convey, in particular I think one of my favorite examples of this is that first conversation between Araragi and Hanakawa, where has these little hops. There's this intentionally surreal foley that's used to give her that extra sense of bounciness and perkiness in that scene. There's a bit where, as she's discussing the ideas like, hey, wouldn't it be neat to meet a vampire, because I've heard there's a vampire walking around. And while she's doing this, she's balancing upon the edge of a little plant bank, and does a couple of spins as well to really convey that sense of excitement and wonder that she has about such an idea, which is then contrasted with Araragi's just stoic, near motionless body as he's just trying to get out of this conversation because he doesn't want to hang around with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I struggled with the tone with these movies because of those little things like the accentuating the jumps with those cutesy noises created this okay, is this a comedy? And then we would have these super serious moments of people getting their limbs torn off to this super serious, but then we would hard cut back to the
vaudeville sequences. Yeah. And even in the middle of the gory action moments, there's points where it is also becoming comedic because what you're seeing is absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's just going in such a different direction than I was expecting after watching the films. Like, it almost feels like we're making a case for, like, an excuse for why they made this movie the way they did.
Oh.
When...
No, it's just... It's an amorphous cloud of confusion of all these creative choices that they made that turn into what this is.
Like, no, sorry, like, before... Nothing in the book, for what we've read so far, has any... Nothing excuses the fact that every 30 fucking seconds they put noir up on the screen.
Yeah.
Or rouge, or a random fucking word. Like, the book didn't force them to do that, as shit as it appears to be, just on the little bit that you've read. That they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to make a helicopter sound every time they pulled the camera back, or like as an aerial shot. That's on them. Like, they didn't have to make all the ladies' boobs ludicrously large and have...
Okay.
Even if the
Okay.
book said that,
I need to get to that
they can
sequence
still
now.
say no.
Okay, I think it's the next chapter. Alright, but yeah. Essentially, the narrative that I want to paint as far as viewing and grasping these fucking movies is that I think there's a dilemma here between an extremely talented artistic crew trying so hard to elevate what is an utterly trashy novel. And in the process of doing so, they wind up doing such flips and leaping through so many hoops to do this, that in the process of doing a backflip, their head winds up their own ass.
Well, can I ask about, in terms of the book, the source material, does it have those same tonal clashes? Does the author show, like, or like describe like body parts being thrown off? Does it describe that sexual assault that...
Yes, it does. I'm getting to the sex things. But yes, but the thing is, let's find some of the dramaturgy fight, because that's got the most dismemberment as far as the early stuff goes.
Did you see, like, the heads rolling?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that bit's fun. And yes, because the tone that I've been describing, the detached irony that everything has... Okay, there we are. We're at Hanako's conversation. Alright, I'm nearly here. They're throwing the baseball.
Well, while you're searching for that, can I just... Because when you say detached irony, that's from the book, right? Like, you're saying the book has...
Yes, not the film.
Yeah.
Essentially one of the problems that this has in comparison to the other adaptations is that they go in really hard by maintaining the narration. Like, they just straight up include the narration to the point where a lot of the TV show, feels like a radio player that's got a slideshow in the background.
This is actually a problem I had with the John Carter movie, is that I've read the first Princess of Mars novel, and it is one of these... I mean, it's effectively a young adult, like, novel from a first-person perspective that probably the movie needed the narration, because there's all this, like, stuff that's going on that kind of just doesn't get explained and get... with a better director would have, like, introduced these elements better, but they're introduced at least at all in the novel by John Carter just being like, oh, what is this thing? I mean, in the book, it describes how for, like, months he's learning the alien language to talk to them, and in the movie they're like, here, drink this magic tea.
For Junior!
Yeah, that's actually what I was meant to say with when we asked different books and film. Like, when I meant space, I meant, like, as in time, space and time. I meant, like, as in a book you have time to set things up.
Yeah.
That a film just does not have. That's what I was trying to...
Yes, that's another logistical concern. And that's one that can be resolved by adapting texts, which don't have those time issues, and that sense of scope, like, say, the BBC adaptation of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is the best thing ever, because it's people in rooms talking to each other, in both forms. Alright, here we are. here is the fight. I guess I should, while we're here, for those, if for some reason you are clicking a video by me that's discussing KIZUMONOGATARI and you're not familiar with this franchise, then thank you very much for having that much faith in me. But I guess I should describe the plot. So, guy meets girl, they talk a bit, guy then meets another girl who's a vampire, she's dying, he decides to offer his own blood to her to be nice, because he's such a nice guy deep down. And she then says, hey, now I sucked your blood, you're now my thrall, you gotta go get back the body parts some vampires stole from me. He then manages to beat all of those vampire hunters and get the body parts back. Then, when they're happy, he gets to know her a bit better and they're having a good time. And then he remembers, oh wait, it's a fucking vampire, it eats people, maybe this was a bad idea. And so he decides to try and fight her, and in the process of doing so comes to a conclusion where he reduces her down, he sucks her blood, while she sucks some of his, and the end result is that they both become... Louis quipping that there's a lot of sucking in this movie. And then he drinks her down, so they're both basically a 10th vampire, and everyone is extremely unhappy with this turn of events, is how the text ends. So here we have, in answer to Matt's question about how, say, it handles things like the horrible gore, let us get to it, he said, rotating an arm, and striking at me. The sheer speed of it belied his massive physique, his fist barreling toward me with his whole weight behind it like a pro boxer's punch. I could see it. I could see it with my vampire eyes.
What?
But, even if I could see it, there was nothing I could do about it. A moment later, my left arm was gone. It hadn't broken, nor had it been torn off. The impact of Dramaturgy's punch had blown it to smithereens. It wasn't a matter of pain. Fear had instantly overtaken my body. I mean, I just lost a fifth of it. Reflexively and instinctively, I started to run away from Dramaturgy.
Sorry, two adverbs in a row. I'm okay. I'm not like Stephen King with adverbs, but 2 in a row is harsh. You better, if you're gonna do that, you better be confident.
Yeah, that again. There's that same level of detachment in the way that it conveys things, even when he's like screaming and panicking. It's still the sense of, these things just kind of happen, you know?
These things are happening to me. Look at them happen to me. My arm torn off.
Well, we talked about adapting, like, work. Like, surely then the way to adapt it isn't to make it gory just because it was described in the book as gory, because in the book that gore is counterbalanced by the detachment. So surely when you're deciding to make a film of it, you would counterbalance in a different way. Like, you might just not make it as gory, or you might not show quite as much blood. You might jump cut a little bit. Like, there are things that you can do to keep that sense of...
Well, I mean, there's times where it'll do, like, a knock, and there's a beat, and then a ridiculously huge stream of blood coming out. I think the best example of that is when KIZUMONOGATARI says, sorry, I've forgotten this information. I'll just fix my brain. Shoves her hand inside her skull, fiddles around while this comically huge volume of blood streams out of her head at a really high pressure, and then she goes, oh yeah, I remember now. Like, there are moments where it can work to be ludicrously excessive. And there's other times where, like, I think when KIZUMONOGATARI is lying on the ground, begging for Araragi's blood, where, like, that is a very confronting scene. The sound, the visuals, it's an intentionally awkward and very uncomfortable moment where it's doing everything it can to make you feel sympathetic towards her.
Yeah, there is something about that scene that I actually did find quite, like you say, confronting. It felt like his reaction, it felt like what I imagine H.P. Lovecraft is imagining when he's trying to describe these people who are, like, seeing something that's, like, so otherworldly and they're, like, panicking and stuff. So, like, in something else that could have been a really cool scene. And then and then other stuff happens.
I think it's telling that that's one of the better scenes, and I still have so many problems with it, in that he, like you say, it's very confronting, but then he picks her up, and then he throws her, and then she bounces along the ground in some, like, ridiculous comedic fashion.
No, I don't mean those things. There's, like, it's like everything up until he starts actually actively engaging with her.
Yeah.
Because then we get things like, he's like, she's what the fuck is going on? I'd better run away. And then he's like, but maybe I should help her?
Yeah.
Like, I would have been fine with if she'd used vampire mind control powers, because that's often a thing that happens in vampire stories. But then he just sort of goes back for no reason, and then he's like, I'm gonna die to help you because...
Yeah, I can't believe they didn't do the vampire mesmerizing or mind control at all, because that's such an easy way to get him to do such an insane thing, yet they somehow just... It's such a dumb, stupid way to do it. I don't care if it was in the book. You change that shit. You just say that,
that's fucking right.
That's how you adapt a thing.
It's also an incredibly dumb location for it. All I could think of when I'm supposed to be going, wow, what a confronting scene, or how scary, or all the things I'm supposed to be thinking, all I can think of is, where's everyone in this damn subway?
Oh yeah, so that's actually a change from the book. In the book, it's just a back alleyway.
Well,
there's no light, and then like it's going for the subway as like this is a point of transition and change. Is clearly what the film language is going for, and that's part of why the film uses such like there's this weird dissonance going on where this particular work, unlike the rest which use more abstract backgrounds, to the point where there's a running gag where people will go to a donut shop, specific donut shop, to buy donuts, and anytime someone goes to the donut shop, the location it's in is increasingly absurd. So to begin with, it's just like clearly on the outskirts of town. Then the next time they go, it's in the middle of Monument Valley in Arizona. Nevada, my bad. Arizona or Nevada, I can't remember. It's in that desert. The next time they go, it's atop Niagara Falls. So it's able to do things like that because, like, the location doesn't really matter. It's the idea of the act that's important. Whereas this text tries to... Well, I mean, doesn't try to. It flat out has photorealistic backgrounds at all points. And it tries to make them as impersonal and minimalist as possible. Indeed, I mentioned while we were watching that right at the start, that first conversation between Araragi and Hanakawa, a car crash happens during that conversation, and it's about 10 meters away from them, but they just both completely ignore it as it happens and immediately after, because that's the level of detachment and irrelevance such matters have to this bizarre supernatural ongoing and their own personal narrative. But it does lead to those logistical concerns that can really take you out of the text. Because now it's just, why is there no one in this subway at night? Why can no one hear this extremely loud, all-encompassing crying?
Yeah, I don't think they really... After they did the car crash thing, I don't think they really, followed up on that at all, really, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like they had this one idea to set the tone early on, and then it's never really followed up on as a concept for maintaining the idea of there is a functioning world going on outside here that they're just so detached from because they're focusing on their own things.
Maybe if they had a little bit more about the main character's parents or
the rest
others
of the family at all.
Or any other human beings at all, like something to make them people, you know? Like, that might have been of some help.
I mean, this is where I can say, the rest of the series does do those things, but then you'd be watching more of this.
So there is more of this stuff?
Oh boy, you've seen an episode of the more of this.
What? When was this?
Do you recall me showing you a thing involving toothbrushing?
Oh my god, is that?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know if he ever showed you that, but there was an episode... Is it the whole episode or just a scene?
The whole episode is building to it.
Yeah, so there's a scene in one of these episodes where...
That's the second season of the show, so...
Okay. The character is... offering to brush his sister's teeth for some reason. I can't remember what the context.
Alright, the context of that one is his younger sister's all, hey, you're friends with someone, because main character gets a lot of friends after this incident. He learns to be a bit less shitty of a person. One of the long-term narrative things is that he is still a pretty shitty person, because he's so fixated on anyone he meets is not allowed to die. He gets fixated on not letting women have their own agency, and a lot of it's about him learning to let go, because it starts off looking like he's going around solving all these girls' problems. While the guy in the Hawaiian shirt's all, nah, they're fixing their own problems, you're not doing anything. And then that guy just flat out leaves, and he has to reconcile the fact that, yeah, no one actually needs him in that context. And maybe he should respect people, and then they can do things, and maybe he'll actually be able to interact with them in a healthy way. But anyway, so he's got a friend who's 40, and one of his younger sisters is 40, and she's all, hey, I want to meet her. And then he's all, nah, I'm not going to let you meet her because she's weird. She's horny and she likes chicks, and I don't want her to do a sex on you. And he says, okay, if you can withstand me brushing your teeth for 5 minutes, then it's okay. And Matt is dying inside as I describe this episode.
It just makes me so mad that they made more of this. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, there's no fixing this. I don't care. Like, we've seen, like, say, with God of War 4, we've seen a pretty trashy storyline be somewhat, not redeemed, but I'm, like, okay to see more of it after what they did. There's no redeeming this. There's no... I don't care how good you say it is. I don't care if they say they try and make him... Like, it was so fucking shit. Like, this is a terrible trilogy of films. If you're gonna make something... Like, I don't understand why the people who made that series couldn't have just... Like, that series that you were talking about over there. They should just make something new. Because I don't want to see these characters ever again. I don't want to be reminded of this. Ever. Ever again.
Now, I've got to pick up on a thing you said there, which is it's a poor trilogy of films, and the pacing of these as individual films is itself a very interesting decision. By interesting, I mean bad. I made the quip before that these films shouldn't exist. The source text says that it should never be adapted into an anime, and the first film ends before anything happens. It is straight up the first act of a story. And as a result, there's no real rising action in it. It's a guy meets some people, becomes a vampire, and then sits in a room and talks for 20 minutes, and it ends.
I feel like the first and the third movie were more painful to sit through. The first because nothing happened. The third because we've sat through 2 hours of this already.
Had a very long ending as well.
Yeah. It's also the longest one. It's 90 minutes for the third, and the first two are just an hour each.
Yeah, and Yep.
Can I get back to the whole like adaptation and like trying to get the right tone from some of the book, having the detached tone, and we've said many times this idea of trying to elevate this material, which obviously isn't very good. I would say that, I mean, I guess I know that you guys aren't saying this, but even just the suggestion that somehow these filmmakers are in some way there's an excuse for them just makes me so mad. Like, and this is where I'm coming from with what I'm about to say. There's no reason why they need to do this stupid auteur bullshit to try and elevate something. They could have tried adding some humanity to the characters. They could have tried... I don't know, I'm going to stick with that. They could have tried adding some humanity to the character. They could have, like, tried to focus on more on his family or trying to work out, like...
He had to give up his humanity.
Oh my god.
Alright, I'm going to switch gears for a bit. Upon taking off her sweater and undoing her bra, Hanakawa's breasts seemed to grow bigger. Was it some kind of optical illusion? No, a vampire's eyes couldn't be deceived. As Hanakawa was now, at least as far as I could observe from over her blouse, her breasts hardly paled in comparison to Kissshot's and even rivaled them. Not only that, they were so wonderfully shaped. Now that she had taken off her bra, they should have been without support, but instead, they seemed to defy the laws of physics. Was Hanakawa ignoring the effects of gravity despite being a regular human? Now this exceeded my imagination. Of course, I'd made this request of Hanakawa precisely because I judged that she might be thus endowed. Even then, to call it training had been horribly rude. Tsubasa Hanakawa. Pound for pound, she could definitely stand up a kiss shot. Who knew Hanakawa had such breasts? Let's talk about male gaze.
That was a fair bit of it.
Alright, so... gaze, when it refers to film, I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode, is the idea that the camera is looking at things and therefore you can frame things to depict the way people look. And so the way that the person sees the world who's manning the camera will to a certain extent impact the way that the camera looks at things. And in doing so, you can wind up reinforcing ideas about the way things should look and the way things behave just through the way that you look at things. This film is very uncomfortable because it gets incredibly leering of women and their bodies. The rest of the TV show absolutely does this, if not even more so. But there is a scene here which is just straight up intimidation and cajoling a woman for sexual favors. And even then, this is a difficult thing where, like, later on in the text, some of the stuff that's here is very much part of character flaws that are addressed. But seeing these actions to begin with characters that you don't really like in the first place, if you're just watching KIZUMONOGATARI, makes it that much harder to even care about wanting to see them improve. It's just, you don't want to see this level of toxic behavior in your life. Where am I going with this, beyond it being leering and creepy and bad? There's some really pretentious shots in the middle of this sequence where Araragi cajoles Hanakawa into letting him touch her boobs. While they're talking and discussing this concept, it starts interspersing expressionist shots of Hanakawa running naked through a white background, which then shows a red spot, indicating that she's running through a Japanese flag. She then breaks through the red flag, which then turns into a large number of hands which grope and pull her back in. So a bit of what this is going on semiotically is her attempts to stand up against and play against the stereotype of the Nadeshiko Yamato, the ideal Japanese woman who is demure and accepting and encouraging of sexual behavior with her chosen one, and her getting pulled back in. It comes in out of nowhere, and I think the point that I want to get to here is that you can be critical of leering, you can be critical of gaze, you can do ironic lechery and ironic leering, but even with the irony, you're still participating in the act of leering. And so, you can say, actually, this is criticism, but when you're still using that same cinematic language, people are going to use it to be voyeuristic. And there are ways that you can address these sorts of ideas in a way that is a lot less denigrating of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an utterly disgusting film, and you know, like I was talking about, like all the reasons why, like I didn't want the people who made this film to get off the hook because of like filmmaking reasons, but that's as well as another one. It's like I don't care if that's in the book. Like
you guys were still complacent in agreeing to do this,
and like they were clearly quite enjoying it around the time of the scene where he's the sexual assault scene, the sexual abuse scene. Like it was played with such glee.
I think ultimately the points I wanted to get across here is, even if you are striving to make something tremendous, that there's a bit of an idea that art comes through adversity, which is fine, and that the pursuit of making some truly great art, the pursuit itself is an acceptable end goal, and it's okay for things to have failed up to that point if your heart's in the right place and you're trying to do things, but you can still have an artistically oriented failure which makes something so damaging and poor in the process that it's really not worth having a part of your life. Like, it's fine to consume media and understand it's got issues, but generally it's healthier to be finding things which just doesn't have those problems in the first place.
Yeah, I was going to save this to the last thing that I was going to say, but it seems like a good time to say it now. I was like, some things are just so trash and so disgustingly bad that, like, even talking about them, even discussing them, like, it just feels unnecessary and icky. Like, the prospect of having to... One of the problems that and this is because I'm in a bubble, obviously, but at least in my mind, I have a problem where I just can't imagine anyone enjoying this film. And because I can't imagine it, it means that either A, I'm either talking to people who also hate it, in which case I'm like, what's the point of talking about this?
We're preaching to the
all, yeah, we all hate this fucking film, and you might as well not talk about it at all then. I just want to talk about something else or do something else. And if it's someone who does like the film, there's just so utterly unworthy of my time or effort that it leads to the same problem. Like, if you like this film, you're either 14 and an imbecile, or you're not 14 and an imbecile. Like, yeah. There's no... I can't fathom any other way.
it's such a, like... Yeah, not even, like, this is pointless. It's like, the idea that I have to justify my position...
Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it. Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. Like, I feel like I'm a worse person for us watching this. I feel like I've lost a piece of me, and a good piece of me as well. Like, something... I am worse off as a person for having watched this horrible, horrible thing. And the very idea that someone could have enjoyed this is mystifying to me.
So I just need to put you through a few more experiences like this for enough of the abyss to claim your soul and your humanity, that you too can revel and dance in the darkness that is not anime fans, but anime fans. Is there anything else you'd like to add there? Because I feel like this is a good closing point for tonight.
Yeah, I think that does it. Like, we can talk about it, we can talk about other things, but I feel like it's not really worth it after those points.
Yeah, like, this is basically the journey I wanted to go on, is discussing, like, the noble goal of trying to make an adaptation of a text, and how that ultimately can lead to failure. I really like a lot of specific visual moments in these, but the overall text ultimately isn't worth that cost. So from there, I think I'll just put on the desktop audio playback. Just let this play for a bit, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.